Karen, your first question is for Mr. Fisher.
Mr. Fisher, you were the head of the Department of Development when the nation and Ohio went through this terrible recession described as the worst since the Depression, lost hundreds of thousands of jobs in Ohio. I'm wondering, in hindsight, what could you or should you have done to help stop that job loss? You resigned as the head of the Department of Development when you chose to run for this office. What could you or should you have done, and should you have resigned?
Well, Karen, I'm very proud of the work that Governor Strickland and I have done over the last 3 years on the ground, saving and creating jobs, and I'm continuing to do that work. The Governor and I went to Detroit not long ago to meet with the executives of GM, and that had a lot to do with the addition of a third shift at GM Lordstown and bringing the Mustang engine right here to Ford Brook Park. But I also, as I said in my opening remarks, Karen, believe that there are some things that are simply beyond the control of a governor and a lieutenant governor in any state, regardless of their party. When you have federal policies that are undermining what you're doing on the state level, you've got an obligation, I think, and a responsibility to try to change those policies. By giving tax breaks to companies that outsource their jobs to China and India to Mexico, by not giving exactly the opposite, a federal job creation tax credit to a company to create a job right here in Cleveland or in Northeast Ohio, that's wrong. I also don't like the fact that we are bailing out banks but shortchanging small businesses. We need to take $30 billion, Karen, of the TARP money that's been paid back to the federal government and use it as a community loan pool to community banks for small businesses that have never missed a payment. Bottom line is that I'm proud of the work we've done, I'm proud of the work we continue to do, but until we change federal policies that got us into this economic recession, we're not going to be able to really chart a new path for Ohio.
All right, Reggie, a question for Ms. Brunner.
Sure, Ms. Brunner. You just commented that money and endorsements should not control campaigns. Obviously, your fundraising efforts in this campaign have been well documented, the struggles that you have had. But over the past month or so, you have accused your opponent or his campaign several times of relying on its relationship and support from Governor Ted Strickland to potentially or essentially intimidate donors not to be giving to your particular campaign. On one hand, it seems like candidates in your position would encourage people to give to you and not the other, but you seem to be making a far more serious accusation here. I was wondering if you might be able to cite examples and expound on that.
Thank you, Reggie. I'm really glad you asked me that question. I'm not here to accuse Lieutenant Governor Fisher of particular instances because he keeps saying that I have to have evidence to back up. Although the evidence is there, there are a lot of people who don't feel comfortable stepping forward. The bigger issue is that I've made the pledge, and I've stuck to the pledge, that I will not take money from banks that received TARP money, Troubled Assets Relief Program money, bailout funds. And it's a real problem if someone goes to the Senate where we have some monumental challenges ahead of us, such as further work on health care, banking reform, immigration reform, and those who have taken money from people that they've given money to. For instance, there's likely to be a clamor and a cry again, and I know Governor Strickland himself has said that we're likely to need more money from the stimulus. You can't take money from people that you're giving money to, because no matter how upstanding you think that you are, it causes you to pause, it clouds your judgment, and people have a perception that when there is sometimes inevitable slowdown in the process, that's the basis for it. I know this. I inherited an election system from Ken Blackwell, who took stands on issues he shouldn't have as Secretary of State, who headed up the Bush re-election campaign, and when there were problems, people perceived that there was something wrong with the system, and democracy is fragile. People have to trust it to be able to use it and participate for it to be healthy. The same goes for members of Congress and the U.S. Senate.
Ms. Brunner, you've made a lot of decisions as Secretary of State, and you took office at a time when a lot of people were concerned about elections in Ohio. You said so yourself, and you described the state as a controversial battlefield, especially during presidential campaigns. Your office is also on the apportionment board, which will draw legislative district lines next year. Wouldn't you have been able to affect more direct and immediate change for Ohioans if you had run for re-election as Secretary of State instead of running for an office where you could potentially end up being in the minority?
I don't believe so, Karen. First of all, when I went into office, there were 4 goals that I had, and I've met all 4 of those goals in the first 2.5 years. Were I to stay a second term, I could certainly fine-tune those things, but seeing as how things occurred at the end of 2008 and into 2009, we are in the worst economic condition that we've been in since the Great Depression. Most of the help seems to be coming from Washington. I love public service because I understand it's really about you all and not me. It's about whatever I can do in the short period of time that I have to make my community better, to make people's lives better, and hope that the ripple effect of that will carry on. And seeing as what is able to be done in the special time that we're in, which you can compare to the times of the 60s with the war on poverty, or the times during the Great Depression and into World War II, that we are at a time where we drastically need change, where the New Deal was systematically unraveled through some of the Reagan policies, and where we have to build up from the ground up, and the more that we can make individual people in a position to take care of their families and to be prosperous, the more prosperous and the quicker our economy will jump back to where it needs to be.
Reggie, your question for Mr. Fisher.
Sure. Mr. Fisher, with 3 weeks out or so from the primary, the polls indicate that it's still a relatively close race. A very large number of Democrats who have said that they're undecided. They have not made up their decision at this point. I'm wondering, Ms. Fisher, Ms. Brunner also commented in her opening statement that the differences between the two of you are less issue-oriented. I'm wondering if you might be able to point to a recent bill in the U.S. Senate or one that's upcoming in which you may vote differently from your opponent should, if both of you were in Congress, to maybe highlight a difference between the two of you on issues.
The women here. You know, I'm not going to presume how Jennifer would vote, so I think all I can tell you is how I would vote. I would have wanted a public option in our health care bill. I believe that we should get rid of the filibuster. I believe that it is outrageous that there are 1 or 2 senators who can stop unemployment compensation for millions of Americans simply because they got out of the wrong side of their bed. And I believe that we need to hold Wall Street far more accountable by having a strong, robust consumer financial watchdog agency. Bottom line is that my focus, Reggie, is on jobs. Doing everything we can to save and create jobs and to build a new economy. The American dream is not about getting by, it's about getting ahead. And so moving to a clean energy economy is going to be my top priority.